Well, hi everybody. Welcome. My name is Melissa C. I'm a recovered compulsive overeater. I'm in New York, and welcome to all the new people and everyone else. I'll give just a real quick before I jump into the chapter, since there are some newcomers. I've recovered from what they say is a hopeless, seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, and my experience was at the depths of my disease. I was over 300 pounds. I could not stop eating, no matter all the knowledge that I had, no matter all the consequences. My knowledge, my consequences, and my strong desire, none of that was the solution. Um, but these 12 steps are, and I'll outline through the chapter now, like what it really means when we say that there is a solution, and what it means to be recovered. Because what it means to be recovered is that means that you have found the solution, and that you've taken the solution. And this chapter really says, for me, the exact key. There's a paragraph here. When we get there, I'll really kind of drill down and make sure that it's abundantly clear what that solution is. So if you've got your books, let's like crack them open. And we'll jump right into page 17. And there's a solution. It says that we are people who normally would not mix, but there exists among us a fellowship of friendliness and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We're like the passengers of a great liner the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Sounds great, right? But now here it says, but unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy and escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us, but that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. So, just finding a group of people who have the same problem as me might make me feel good. It might make me have some sort of fellowship and connection, and oh wow, we've all experienced this thing together. That is not enough. That's not quite it. So here it says the tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. So our common problem is not what necessarily binds us, it's our common solution. That there is a solution, and it's a common one. And we have a way out on which we can absolutely agree, and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news the book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. So, that paragraph talks about friendships that come from being rescued together, and that those relationships don't endure once the rescuing is done and the celebration is over. It's like, oh, yay, we got rescued. We celebrate, and now everyone kind of goes their own way. That's not what this is. Ours continues indefinitely, because to remain rescued, in order for us to remain rescued, in order for me to remain rescued, I have to help in the rescuing of others. I must participate in helping others get rescued as well. Our recovery depends upon the growth of our spiritual condition, which is only sustainable through harmonious action. Only way that we can have continued recovery is through harmonious action, through helpful action. Um, we're bound together through self sacrifice and working with others. That's what binds us together. And those that have been rescued, what do? We consistently get back in the water and rescue others. In fact, we cannot remain rescued unless we do that very thing. And we like to say that we're part of God's search and rescue mission, that for us is key to our solution. Page 18. An illness of this sort, and we have come to believe that it's an illness, involves those about us in a way no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him and no one is angry or hurt. But not so with the alcoholic illness, for there goes all annihilation of all the things worthwhile in life. So, our disease of compulsive eating is rarely even viewed as a disease, or actually even as an addiction. It's rarely seen that it's that serious. We get very little understanding. That's the truth. And we often don't even give it to ourselves. We don't even consider this is that serious in ourselves. And the frustrating thing with this disease is that the sick person has no enthusiasm for the treatment. Oftentimes, people are offered the solution and they're like, ugh, it doesn't sound like something that they're enthusiastic to do. You know, we're lectured out there in the world, right? What my experience was, I was lectured a lot, maybe even ridiculed and like fat shamed. Like whether I was fat shaming myself, I would look in the mirror and say, God, I'm so fat. I should do something about this. Or other people would say things but nobody said, myself included, was you are in the grip of a very serious illness. I wasn't given that information. And although I suffered miserably, I didn't take this problem very seriously. And I would have to say, my family also suffered as a result. I was not the best me. When I was 300 pounds, over 300 pounds, I was not an active participant in mothering. I really wasn't. I wasn't as I was in some ways, but I didn't participate around the house. I wasn't an asset to my siblings or my parents. I think it was kind of like a great drain on people. Um, and I didn't take it seriously. I sort of made this like it wasn't that big a deal. I ought to be able to do something about it. Doctors repeatedly attempted to scare me, and family members would sit me down and try to tell me that they were worried. And none of those things worked. None of those were the solution, except obviously something did work, right? There was a solution. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today, having been freed. It's been over 10 years. I've been abstinent, recovered. I've been relieved of over 160 pounds. I've lived through hard times and great times without any desire or necessity to eat compulsively. So obviously something worked, right? Or I wouldn't even be talking to you today. So what did persuade me? What actually got my attention was other compulsive eaters. That's what was required. Other people who were also suffering from this or had once suffered and were armed with the solution. Page 18 says this, but the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who's properly armed with facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. So that paragraph is pretty important because we're actually being given directions for how to carry this message. And if you remember, especially if you're new, you're thinking, wait a second, I'm not up to that yet. But we found out that part of our solution is rescuing other people as soon as we're rescued ourselves. So we are going to need this information. It is important, and it's important for us to learn it as we go. So how do you win the confidence of others? First of all, you have to be an ex-problem drinker, an ex-problem eater. That's why my family members couldn't do anything to help me, because they didn't have this condition, and neither did my doctor. They did not have that prerequisite. And so you have to be a non-drinker or a non, and someone who's not doing it compulsively, not someone who never did, right? And you also can't be someone who's still doing it, right? Which is why, like they say, you cannot you cannot transmit what you don't have. So it's not really helpful for people to be carrying, the message if they themselves are living with the disease, right? If they themselves are still practicing compulsive eating, they're not really well equipped to be carrying the message, right? Um, and so when we carry the message, we don't use frothy emotional appeal, meaning we don't sit people down and say, oh my God, you're killing yourself. Look what you're doing to yourself. Those were the things that people did for me. You're a smart girl. You're a beautiful girl. Look at your family. Look at your kids. Do something about it. That's frothy emotion. Instead, what we do is we're armed with facts about ourselves, not necessarily facts about the dangers of compulsive overeating. Like, I'm not armed with the facts. That's not my approach when I talk to people about how dangerous it is to be obese. That's not my position. I don't tell people, oh my gosh, it's really bad for your heart and it's really bad for your blood pressure or your diabetes. But instead, I talk about myself and my experience. That's what I'm most armed with. That's the area that I'm an expert in. I'm an expert in how I suffered with this disease. That's my experience. And what I find seems to most draw fellows in, other compulsive overeaters in, is when I share a story of my own suffering. When I tell something that other people who are out there suffering have perhaps experienced themselves, right? And so I'll often talk about the severe consequences that I suffered as a result of this disease, whether it was my blood pressure, whether it was, other health issues that I had. But even more than that, I think that people generally relate to is my thinking that surrounded myself when I was about to eat, or when I was eating, or when I was trying not to eat. When I tell people that I would be given a piece of cake, and before I took a single bite of it, or before my slice was even cut, I knew it wasn't going to be enough. I already longed for more. Those of you who have this disease will nod their heads. They will understand what it is I'm talking about. And that's not frothy emotional appeal. That's my experience with this. And that's what generally piques the interest in others. It gets the attention of the addict. The next paragraph also tells me precisely how I'm going to approach someone. So it says here that the man who's making the approach has had the same difficulty, have to have the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he's talking about, that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer, that he has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever, except the sincere desire to be helpful, that there are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. These are the conditions we have found most effective. Okay, so what's effective here? What are they explaining to us? The right information delivered from a calm and hopefully humble messenger, right? That when we deliver the message, we should have a calm demeanor about us. People are not convinced when the person carrying the message has a superior attitude, right? That thinks that they're better. They talk down to people. You know, I've often heard, and I think this is erroneous, when people say, I went from like, yes, yes, yeah, but to yes, ma'am. I don't expect anybody to yes, ma'am me. I'm just another person, right? And that's, um, I think that's misinformation. There is no holier than thou. We are, I like to think about it this. I got the treatment perhaps a little bit ahead of someone else, or I took it a little bit ahead of someone else does not make us superior at all, right? We're all children of a loving creator, doesn't matter. So the person carrying the message should have that demeanor. Um, and that, you know, we shouldn't have an axe to grind, meaning a complaint that we must discuss, perhaps an issue. Some people have an issue with pay and weight programs, or even offshoots of OA, other offshoots of OA. And they sort of carry the message with this, well, when I do it, that way didn't work, and this way is the way that works. And that food plan didn't work, but this food plan didn't work. And nor do I have an axe to grind about food plans or specific foods, from other people. I know what my allergic foods are. I know what my alcoholic foods are. I can offer some guidance and help with others. I can sort of ask you some hard questions to look at those actions and those foods and those behaviors yourself. But my position is not going to be, I am anti, the food industry in this country. That is not, that's an axe to grind. If I took that position, that I'm anti McDonald's and I'm anti, high fructose corn syrup, and that was the way that I led, that's not this message. Those things might be true. I might not dig all those things. However, that's not my issue. That's not my platform. Nor should we have a platform other than we're here to do the work that we believe God would have us do. That's my platform, right? And so the recovered fellow also should have the right demeanor, that the way that they carry themselves is louder than their words. And I would say, if you're there carrying the message, look like someone who's received the message, right? Put your best self forward. Don't, like I was always told, um, bring your message to the meeting, bring your mess to your sponsor, right? But to a meeting, to a place where you're carrying the message, that you should be carrying this message. Page 19 through 20, it says here, of necessity, there'll be discussion of matters medical, psychiatric, social, religious. We are aware that these matters are from their very nature controversial, and that nothing would please us so much as to write a book which would contain no basis for contention or argument. We shall do our utmost to achieve that ideal, because most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints and respect for their opinions and our attitudes, which make us more useful to others. And that our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend not on our food plans, but on our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. My very life is going to depend upon this. So in recovery, right, there might be conversations that involve topics that might seem to incite disagreements, might seem to spark a debate and disputes, but our solution means that we're going to proceed very carefully and that we don't set out to instigate. We're not out here trying to poke holes in the ways that other people do things. That's instigating a problem. And why not? Why wouldn't we do that? Well, because it's not helpful and it's not useful. And our solution is to be useful. It's to be useful and it's to be helpful so that we can meet people's needs. And we have to be tolerant of their shortcomings and their viewpoints. And I think about tolerant as this. It's not like I have to somehow stomach other people, like I have to tolerate them, like I'm above them. Remember, we're not above anybody, but it means for myself, is I gotta get a little thicker skinned. It means I can't get so irritated and annoyed by the way different people say things, by the way different people do things. I have to be desensitized, and because my life will depend upon this. And I would say that's true for me inside the rooms and outside the rooms. That whether it's in my family life, whether in my, in my home, in my occupation, no matter where I go, that I cannot be so sensitive that everything that everybody else does triggers me, sets me off, because that is self centered. When I experience everything that everybody does as personal to me, then I am living a self centered life. And that cannot be my solution. So now we're going to look at the different types of drinkers or the different types of eaters. And that's page 20 through 21. It says moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have a good reason for it. They can take it or leave it alone. And those are people, I would say, they don't even really have a problem at all, right? Um, if they have a good reason, like their pants got too tight, good enough reason, right? Okay, they leave it alone. Or their doctor says, yeah, you really shouldn't eat that. It's not good for you. Okay, we leave it alone. Now, hard drinkers may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. So a hard drinker would take it to, a further out there. And it may cause him to die a few years before his time. But if there is sufficient, strong enough reason, whether it's ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate. And although he might find it difficult and troublesome and might even need medical attention. And so those are the people I would say who are successful at pay and weigh programs, who, you know, embark on a program, they pay for it, and it works. Or the doctor might prescribe something for them, or even, some people even have bariatric surgery. The people that who have success with bariatric surgery are this type, perhaps. They might have needed medical intervention, but it actually works for them. And there are those people, right? Um, you know, you can actually also find some of these people at OA meetings because for membership to Overeaters Anonymous, everybody who has a desire to stop eating compulsively is welcomed. And so you might find them there. They can get good support from humans. They can get a food plan. They can get, some group support, and that would work for them. And gosh, I was always trying that approach. That was the one I wanted. I wanted that one, back then. Now it says this, but what about the real alcoholic? He might start off as a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker, but at some stage in his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. So here we're getting a clearer understanding of what a real compulsive eater is. And and why do we need to know this now? It's like I thought we were going to start talking about the solution, right? Aren't we going to talk about the solution? Why do I have to really spend? Why is so much emphasis on diagnostics? Why are we still trying to figure this thing out if I have it? Well, unless I'm convinced that I am the real compulsive eater, I likely won't feel the need for the real solution, right? What I used to want, I say that what I used to want was OA light. If I didn't think I needed a spiritual experience, a rearrangement where God enters my heart and reshapes me, I wouldn't have done it, right? I would have been, all right, I'll give you my food. I'll commit my food. I'll go to a meeting once a week. Good to go, right? But I had to be utterly convinced that that didn't work, that that wouldn't work for me. I had to really know that I was in this category. And the rest of the chapter continues to describe the real alcohol to further help us determine if we fall into this category. And so page 22 says this: why does he behave like this? If hundreds of experiences have shown him that one drink means another debacle with all its attendant suffering and humiliation, why is it that he takes that drink? Why can't he stay on the water wagon? What has become of his common sense and willpower that he will still sometimes displays with respects to other matters? Perhaps there will never be a full answer to these questions. Opinions vary considerably as to why the alcoholic reacts differently. We're not sure. Once a certain point is reached, that little can be done for him. We cannot answer the riddle. Shoo. That's, by the way, that's a relief because I spent so much time trying to answer the why question, that great riddle. And, you know, our solution does not involve discovering why we became compulsive eaters. I don't know. There's lots of theories as to why. And I would say too much of my time and energy was wasted on trying to uncover the why. And I've met a lot of people along the way who I would say they're kind of wasting their energies trying to figure out the why. Because why is an immature question? Why is not a spiritual question? And I would say it's like this: when I'm asking why, it has two things. First of all, it means that I want to assign blame to somebody, generally not me. I want to figure out who did this to me so that I can pin it all on them, right? It's usually our parents, by the way. That was the way I operated. Really wanted to blame my folks for it. And I mean, my experience says they did the best they could. Nobody set out with the intention of screwing me up and making me obese and making me suffer with the food problem. They didn't. By the way, even if they did, uncovering that still wouldn't be my solution. So whether they did it on purpose or not, or had anything to do with my parents and the people who loved me, doesn't really matter. And the other thing I think is the difficulty with the why question is what it really means is I don't like this. I think about my children whenever they asked me when they were little, and I would tell them that they had to do something, whether it was bedtime, and they would say, Why? Why do I have to go to bed? Why? They really did not want me to sit down and explain because little children need 9 hours of uninterrupted sleep, or no. What they wanted was they wanted to wear me down so that they could do what they wanted. And that was pretty much my position too. That's how I viewed recovery. So I could do what I wanted. Um, so even if let's say we spend all this time and energy uncovering the answer and we find out that's why. Well, unless I'm going to get in a time machine and undo what was done, so what? The better question is now what am I going to do about it? Not why. Page 23. These observations would be academic and pointless, right? If our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind and not in his body. My main problem centers in my mind. And if you ask him why he started on that last bender, the chances are he will offer you any of one of 100 alibis. And what are alibis? They're explanations, they're reasons, they're excuses, they're defenses. I would say an alibi is actually this: it's a lie that my mind creates to get my mind to give me permission to eat, right? It's a lie that I'm already going to believe because I fabricated it myself. And so sometimes these excuses have certain plausibility. They sound like they make sense in the moment, but none of them really make sense in light of the havoc that it causes. So in a weird way, what happens is these lies my mind tells me that gets me to give in, they sound believable. And really, I was told this, that my disease lies to me in my own voice. It uses my voice to lie to me. It says exactly what I'm going to believe. It sounds really reasonable. And what it would do for me was it would make that extra bite or extra food helping or food change seem reasonable, seem like no big deal, would minimize how important it really was. It would make it seem like it was not a big deal. My brain minimizes the danger of the food. And it says here, it sounds like the philosophy of a man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so that he can't feel the ache. If you draw this fallacious reasoning, fallacious, mistaken, misleading, erroneous, deceptive, false, wrong, untrue, all of this untrue reasoning to my attention, if you would have brought it to my attention, what would I do? I would laugh it off, or I would get irritated and I would refuse to talk. So for me, how do I view it like this? If I think about, I have a headache, so I want to hit myself on the head with a hammer. It's kind of like this. All the pain of being morbidly obese, I tried to soothe with more food. Nothing so much as made me feel temporarily relieved of the pain of morbid obesity as another pint of Ben and Jerry's, right? The other thing is that I would use certain foods for what I would say like medicinal purposes. Like I would say it'll make me feel better. This is going to make me feel better because I had such a lack of tolerance. I could not stand feeling uncomfortable for 1 second. And so I kept going to the very thing that actually created greater pain for me. It makes no sense, right? It makes zero sense. Page 23, the third paragraph says this, but everybody hopefully awaits the day when the sufferer will rouse himself from his lethargy and assert his power of will. So, when I read that, I think it wasn't just my family that wanted me to pull myself together, to get motivated, to get moving. I too was awaiting that day. I too had this idea that someday, and I say I used to live my life with this someday when I'm thin, someday when I'm thin out, someday when I'm thin out. It was like my rallying call. It was my mantra, and I lived that way only partly alive. That's like waiting to live until I'm in the body that I like, waiting to behave certain ways until I'm in the body that I like. And I think like I was kind of living my life from like on the inside looking out, inside the window, kind of looking out at the rest of the world saying, yes, someday when I'm thin, I'll do whatever there is they're doing. Page 24, the first paragraph says this is the fact that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drinking. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago without defense against the first drink. So basically, I have willpower that disappears without any warning. My willpower goes away exactly when I needed it the most. All of a sudden, it's no longer there. And, my memory is also unreliable. My memory, my willpower, I seem to remember the consequences after I'm experiencing the consequences. It's like I can't remember how serious and severe it is in the moment. And I would say for me, it was like this. I, you know, the thought that was readily supplanted, that old threadbare thought that I kept going back to, the thing that I would forget was that I actually cared. Because when I was about to binge, I knew I was going to binge. Most of the time, it wasn't like, how did I start binging again? I thought I would just have one or two. After many, many years of in and out of the rooms of Overeaters Anonymous, I knew that once I ate that food, I was going to binge. What the thing I forgot was that Monday morning, I still would be powerless. So I would set out on a Friday saying, I'm going to binge. I am. I don't care. It's Friday. I'm going to let it go all weekend. I'm going to do whatever I want. And I thought I was in control. I thought I was totally in control. And I would say, Monday, I'm going to get it together again. But I could not remember in that moment, that Monday, I was just as much a mess as I was on Friday. And the other thing that I would kind of come up against was I would get this feeling like, I don't care. I don't care. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I did care. I cared deeply. It was in those moments I actually forgot that I cared. I forgot about my children, that I was concerned about my ability to be alive for them. In those moments, what I could not remember was that I had little children who needed me. That's what I couldn't remember. Not that the cookie was going to lead me to eat, but it was that I cared about the consequences of what the cookies did to me. You know, so consequences don't work then. Here we're finding out what's not the solution. Consequences are not the solution. Willpower is not the solution. Humiliation is not the solution. Pain of beating myself on the head with a hammer, not the solution. So, when this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he has probably placed himself beyond human aid. And unless locked up, he may die or go permanently insane. But for the grace of God, there would have been thousands more convincing demonstrations. So many want to stop but cannot. Okay, now we're finding out what is the solution. The solution is the grace of God. God's grace. What is grace? What does that even mean? Well, gracious, in its verb form, means to be considerate, to show favor. So my solution is a God that shows me favor, that actually cares about me enough, that God is favorably inclined towards us, that he wants to show us favor, to do what is best for us. So my entire recovery is reliant on the consideration and favor of my creator, which is unmerited, unearned, and always available. The thing is that I have to align myself so that I can live in a state where I can access God's favor, where I am actually hands open to receive his favorable inclination. That's what the solution is. So here's the solution. It says, none of us are going to like the soul searching or the leveling of our pride. Okay, that's part of our solution. Self searching, leveling of our pride. We have to have our pride leveled. The confession of our shortcomings. We have to be honest. We have to confess what our problems are. That's the process, right? So, you know, I saw that it worked in others. And I come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of the life as we had been living. We found much of heaven and have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we've not even dreamed. And I have to say, I did not dream in the fourth dimension. When I came here, my dreams were of wearing smaller sizes. That's what my dream was. My dream was to not be so damn fat. That's, and I think about it, my dreams were so small, I didn't even know how to dream appropriately. So the great fact is just this. Here it is. This is the solution. Nothing less that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences, which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, towards our fellows, and towards God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. That's my solution. That is our solution, that we have a process that actually, I would say, instead of like a heart transplant, it's sort of like an open heart spiritual surgery. My heart gets opened and it makes room for God to enter my heart and does for me that which I could not do for myself. And my experience has been when God enters your heart, the things that you love, the things that you desire are different. The things that you value are different. I'm going to say it in the most plainest, basic terms. My taste in food is different. And that can only be, I could say there's been times in my life where I've been able to muscle through willpower, not for long, and say, okay, I'm not going to eat it. I'm not going to eat it. I'm not going to eat it. Okay. And then it would give way. Here's what God did for me when He entered my heart. He actually changed what it is I like, what it is I desire. That those other foods, I don't have to use willpower on them because they don't interest me anymore. And not just that, but certain ways that I was living do not interest me anymore. When I live in agreement with God's will, the things that I have to do actually become the things I love to do. I've shared with you guys that my mom, she's aging and she has dementia and she's requiring another level of care from all of us, right? From all of us siblings. And I used to be a person that was a scorekeeper that would keep track of what everybody did. And God has entered my heart and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. I don't care what anybody does or doesn't do. In my family, I love them all dearly. I want to do things for my mother because I love her and because God has rewired my heart. And I'm not doing it with any resentment. And that is a gift. Along the way, I've had to confess my shortcomings. I have had to tell my truth when I don't feel that way. I have to ask God to change my heart and come in and do the miraculous. So here's the thing, right? When we have a relationship with power, a relationship, we're told infinite power and love, it actually makes eating those alcoholic foods uninteresting. It makes keeping score of my siblings uninterested. I'm not interested in it anymore. Bottom of page 25. If you're as seriously alcoholic as we were, there's no middle of the road solution. Don't offer people middle of the road solution. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible. And if we had passed into the region from which there's no return through human aid, you have two alternatives. One, go to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could, and the other one, to accept spiritual help. And this we did because we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. And that's something that I want to say for me. I reached a point where I knew I had two choices. I was either going to have to keep on eating, eat myself into a living coma so that I could not even be aware of how lousy and rotten my life was becoming. And the other one was to accept spiritual help. And for me, I would say there's a sweet spot when we meet people who say, I honestly want to, and I'm willing to make the effort. See, this is a program that's reliant on God's grace, right? Needs, I need God's favorable inclination towards me. But I actually have to want God's favorable inclination towards me. And I have to actually want to do what's ever necessary, whatever is in my human power. Cannot rescue myself, but I have to do everything within my own human power so that I am in a position to receive God's grace. We've had vital spiritual experiences, huge emotional rearrangement. And the things that were once my guiding forces, suddenly they're cast to one side and a completely new set of conceptions and motives seem to dominate them. And so the solution is exactly that God enters our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. And that this we can say, we know as an absolute fact. We are certain of it. I am certain of it. And with that,